Welcome to Unleash Your Inner Goldilocks, how to get it just right. Thank you so much for joining us for another hour of exciting conversation. And today you are thoroughly going to appreciate and dive deep into the conversation with my guest, Christopher Rausch. Christopher, welcome to the episode.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kasturi. Thank you. I appreciate you being here.
My pleasure. So as we get started, I want us to take a moment, think about why do we need to rise above and why do we need to start thinking about, I need to stop with the excuses and transform my mindset. And why is that important and how do I do that? Think about it. Take a moment and think about, where am I stuck? Why am I stuck? And what excuses am I giving to stay stuck there? Then go one step deeper and ask yourself, what are my aspirations? And what would I want my life to be? When I imagine it, what does it look like? What does it feel like? Then start exploring, how do I go from where I am stuck right now? Because the key is knowing I'm stuck, right? So going from where I'm stuck to where I want to fly free. And what does that look like as I fly free? One of the things that I have kept in perspective as I have invested in my self-development and move forward is making sure that my roots anchor me, but my wings allow me to fly. And how do I build my support system that helps me stay rooted to my values and my purpose, at the same time becomes the wind beneath my wings to allow me to fly and support me and cheer on? And so keep those moving pieces in perspective, because nothing in our life journey we do alone. Too many times people say, you know what, Dr. Cass, I got this, I can do this alone. Or, we come into this world alone, we leave this world alone. I figured out how to do everything else in between all by myself. And I always chuckle and say, but did you? Did you really come into this world alone? I thought your mom carried you to term for 9.5 months. I thought that somebody in the hospital helped get you out when your mom was when her water broke and she was going through labor. So there was a team of people who brought you into this world. In fact, you were covered in all kinds of things and they cleaned you up and they helped you cry so that you can breathe. So the very existence of you on this earth is because other people made it possible. And not just you, when all of us, when we die, regardless of what happens to our body afterwards, we are carried, whether I'm cremated or buried. At least 4 people have to carry me. So no, we don't come alone. We don't go alone. What if we figured out how do we live together and allow people to support us? Because it's that community that's going to help us keep our mindset right, shape our mindset, and be our accountability partners, be our blind spot watchers. Because without that, we might be like a rudderless ship just going and going and going. As we start talking and delving into the conversation today, I truly want you to keep these nuggets of wisdom and realities in perspective, because that is what's going to help you stay in your roots, honor your roots, at the same time take flight towards your dreams. And to have this exciting and fun conversation, especially in the month of February, where we are talking about love. Love starts with self-love. Love starts with honoring ourselves and allowing ourselves to fly free. There's nothing more loving than let it free. And why wouldn't you let yourself free? So, Christopher, as we get started, I'm super excited that you are the No Nonsense Coach. You help people deal with real life situations where they are stuck. So as we get started, take a few moments and talk to us about why you got into the process and the service of helping people get unstuck.
Well, Dr. Cass, thank you so much again for having me on here. I'm excited for this conversation. I'm sure you're going to ask brilliant questions, and that's one of them. How did I get started in this? I mean, the long story short is that back when I was 13 years old, I came home from school in the 7th grade one day and found out that my mother had spent all the money that were supposed to go to the rent. She spent it on trying to save her cat. And as a result, we had a lot of cats. We had about 30 cats in the house. And as a result of getting evicted, we wound up living in our car, a 1969 Country Squire station wagon, with 18 of those cats and 2 of those dogs. And so for the 4 ensuing years of my life, it was on the streets and in and out of motels, and had a lot of different things happen to me. Unfortunately, I tried to commit suicide twice, and unfortunately, I sucked at it. And it wasn't until I had a gun put to my head that I had to kind of realize, you know, in the situation that I was in, there was only a few ways for me to get out of it. And one of them was in a back of a patrol car because I was doing bad things, in a pine box, as you were talking about, because I was doing bad things and I could have wound up dead. Or the third thing is I had to, at 17, 18 years old, really start to take responsibility for my life and get myself out of the situation that my mom had created for herself after 4 years of being homeless. That was, you know, it was my ultimate responsibility to take charge of my life. And going from that, being that 7th grade homeless dropout, I got around the right people and ultimately got my GED when I was 18. And then for the next 12 years, I spent time in college and wound up graduating with my master's degree. So for me to go through that experience and go through all those tormenting situations to ultimately come out the other side and be able to go back to the school I dropped out of and speak to that school, it just ignited a flame inside myself, Dr. Cass, where I just couldn't help contain the fact that if I could go from all those extremities and everything else to having a kick-ass life, that I wanted to walk other people through that process. So by just the fact of my nature of helping people, I just started finding the fact that people were coming into my office at work and they would come to me for a work problem, but they would leave an hour later talking about a life problem and telling me that they've never told people these situations. And this was back before I knew about life coaching or anything else. I just wanted to help people. And I just was so excited. The fact, if I could do it for myself, then I could help other people go through it. So with coaching and speaking and everything else, I just got hooked on the fact of personal development, and seeing people go through those transformations became an addiction for me. And I found out that I was actually operating in my zone of genius with what I was doing and transforming people's lives, that ultimately I left that corporate position and have been doing it now for 3 solid years and haven't been more excited.
Beautiful. And so it's very serendipitous that you made this pivot with COVID at a time where everybody was feeling stuck and bereft in their professional life. So that is, it's almost like the universe wanted you to move here.
Yes.
Because the need was there. And you had the life-based experience, or your lived experience makes you a better person at this. You're going to bring empathy. But at the same time, you're also going to say, you know what? I kicked myself in my own butt to get myself off where I was, to get to where I was. And you're going to do the same. And I'm going to push you, prod you, motivate you, inspire you, right? So I can truly see you being that, doing that, and taking a no-nonsense approach, but with an underlying gentleness and empathy. Talk to me about the importance of mixing those and blending, because even parents don't know how to blend the two. They either are very strict and strong, and they think that is the way, no nonsense way, but that actually ends up destroying the person. So how do you find that right balance and lift up the spirit at the same time, kick the butt of the person who needs to get unstuck, right? Mm-hmm. So it's almost like you have an iron fist in a velvet glove. How do you do that? And what tips do you have for parents when they're raising kids to follow that blueprint?
Wow, that is a tremendous question, Dr. Cass. Thank you for asking that. It is very, very interesting in how you have to balance both of those situations, you know, that having that firm hand and that firm word versus also having compassion and love and empathy and understanding for somebody. Because I'd been through those experiences, I know what it's like to feel alone and isolated and abandoned and stuck and not have any hope. So in one sense, with my coaching, I'm able to help people find that inner strength and that resiliency by finding what their why is. My why was not to be on this planet to serve my mom and to keep her going and to keep her in cigarettes and beer and everything else. My why in this world world was actually to go through that experience and find that life was happening for me and not to me. And so being able to guide people with a tender, loving hand is one of the things I pride myself on, because once you have a big enough why, then you can use that as leverage to be able to sit there and say, okay, listen, we're gonna have to get over this hump, and you didn't get here overnight. So you have to understand and have the perspective that if it took you 30 years to get to the situation, it might take a few years for us to get out of the situation. And will it be easy? No, it will be hard, but on the other side of it, it's going to be worth it. And what I talk about is the hero's journey. It's a great documentary. It's on YouTube. It's called Finding Joe. And it talks about how we go through this hero's journey, where it's the peaks and the valleys and the peaks and the valleys. And people get so frustrated and so tired. Chris, I don't want to go through those parts anymore. But when I ask them to look back on their life and to see, when did you grow the most? When things were easy or when things were challenging? Well, of course, when things were challenging. So I get them to shift their perspective about what's hard and what's difficult versus what's worth it. And then ultimately to see that life is happening for you. So these challenges are what it is that we're here to experience in order to become the up-leveled soul that we need to be. So I get them to have to shift that perspective of everything's supposed to be easy and comfortable, and kind of go back to the fact that when you go through those challenging circumstances, that you learn, you gain something of appreciation of a value, as opposed to being given it to you. So for example, I used to give away my coaching as a way of just helping people make the world a better place. But I found out when they don't pay attention. So there has to be a certain amount of leverage within the situation for them to go through something that's challenging, to get that feeling of confidence to go, okay, I can do this on myself. So I have love and empathy for them, but also at the same time, I'm not going to take their excuses, because I know that that's what's got them in these situations before. But it's because they surrounded themselves with people who would allow them to be a victim. Oh, it's okay, Chris. It's okay, Dr. Cass. You've had horrible situations happen to you. It's okay that you're not super successful. We understand, just go ahead and stay there where it's safe. You need to protect yourself. You've been hurt before. Whereas I sit there and look at them like, okay, when you want to achieve this certain situation in life, you have to be willing, in order to get what you don't have, you have to be willing to do what you haven't done. And so what I like to do is be able to give them that leverage and that inspiration to sit there and say, when you go through this, there's going to be so much more deeper meaning and impact for what it's going to mean in your life, and what it is that you can set an example for somebody else to do. So when people come to me and say like, well, Chris, I just don't have time, or I don't have this, or I don't have money, or I don't have education, or I've always been told I'm stupid, then I ask them and I invite them to think, what would life be like if you no longer had that thought in your mind, that limiting belief? What would you be able to do in your life, and what would you be able to accomplish? And so I get them to see what life on the other side of that obstacle is. And so that gives them the fire and the power to sit there and say, okay, listen, I'm going to go through it. And together we go through it, because I tell people I want it most of the time. I want it more than they do. And that's something I've had to work in my life, to know when it's the right time for somebody to go experience that adverse situation in order for them to grow. So it's a definite balance. And sometimes people don't like me very much, but I ask them, did you hire me because you wanted to like me, or did you hire me because you wanted to get out of the way of your own excuses? And so it's just about balancing that bridge and be able to keep them going with enough firm pressure, but also enough love that they get through it and they know that they're supported.
Mm-hmm. So I love how you brought in a few concepts here. So I'm going to touch on the ones that truly resonated to reiterate to the audience here. One is just like, and I'm threading this through a story. The koi only grows as large as its environment will bear. Sure. So if I have it in a little glass dish, it can remain a little fish. I put it in a little pond in the house, it'll grow as big as the pond would bear. But if I go and put it in a river, or I put it in a huge pond, it's going to grow big. Humans are that way too. We will grow to where we give ourselves permission to grow, and the environment will allow us to grow. So if we are stuck, it's important to look at what is our environment, who are the people creating that ecosystem, and how do we change that so that we get all the nutrients and the nourishment and the ecosystem to take off. So I love how you intertwine that with your coaching, but you also talked about, you don't need to like me. You just need to get off the spot from where you're stuck and move forward. Yes. So this brings up a question. A lot of times people look at somebody and judge them, right? Yeah. I'm sure people judge you a certain way. People look at me and judge me a certain way because of their implicit biases about how we look and what that means to them in the subconscious, right?
Right.
So when we start, we have to jump that threshold. And then as we are coaching, we have to remind them that I'm not your friend, I'm your coach, and I am going to push you because that's the only way you're going to be learning, right? And you're going to be growing. How do you deal, or what advice do you have for people who crave being liked? It technically comes from the insecurity of, if you don't like me, then you hate me, right?
Right.
So what guidance do you have for people who crave needing to be liked, and then the trap they fall into by doing everything wrong because they want to be liked? They're putting the emphasis on the wrong thing. They're losing themselves in the process of wanting to be liked.
Yes. Yeah, that's so true. I mean, one of the biggest things I think about is the fact that, when a lot of who we become is from that age of 0 to 5, that conditioning process as kids that we do, because what we're told based on what our parents have told us and what they've made us feel, we kind of use that as a basis for who our identities become. So if we were told that we were stupid, if we were told we weren't pretty, if we were told that we weren't a terrible singer, we were told all these different things as kids, and we weren't given that nurture and that loving, what chances are what's going to be doing is we're going to have that void in our life. And so as we get to become older and as we become adults, we're seeking that validation. We're seeking that external situation to make ourselves feel better, because we didn't get those things necessarily in life. And so for me, it's about being able to sit there and understand the fact that when you love yourself, then that's the basis of starting to sit there and say, okay, I don't need anything external for myself. I am whole and complete as I am today. And I was one of those people pleasers, Dr. Cass. I was out there, as long as I kept everybody laughing, kept everybody thinking, as long as I overproduced on my job and I continued to get increases, as long as I continued to make my partner happy and safe, then I could be happy. And then ultimately what I found out I was doing is I was making everybody else love me for the person that I wasn't. And so when I was a suit and tie speaker and saying all the things that everybody wanted me to say, I was happy, okay, but I wasn't really fulfilled. I wasn't really waking up every day owning who I was. And so I had to get serious and real with myself. I'm like, is this who I am? And I wasn't that person. I wasn't the suit and ties person. I wasn't the one that should go out there and making everybody else happy at my own detriment. So what I did is I surrounded myself with some people that were brighter than smarter than me. I joined a mastermind back in 2013. And I really went through this evolution of looking at who my identity was and why I was seeking that external validation. But part of it was I didn't like the aspects of myself. So as long as I had other people telling me that I was worthy, then that compensated for that own inner insecurity that I had. So ultimately I had to sit there and say, okay, who am I at my core? And ultimately return to those roots. So it was about not dealing with the symptom situations, but really dealing with the core problem. And what I found over the last couple of years in gifting people coaching sessions with myself during COVID, it's just my way of paying it forward, as I started seeing a pattern with people. And so I heard this little whisper in my ear that said, ask them, do they love themselves? Yes or no? And I thought it was a stupid question. I just heard this little whisper. And so I started asking people, just like in situations like this, Dr. Cass, I said, okay, I'm going to ask you a question. I don't want you to think too much about it. It's a yes or no question. Do you love yourself? Yes or no? And 75% of the people that I talk to struggle with liking or loving themselves right in that immediate moment. Well, I kind of like this about me, myself, but I don't like these things about myself. And it was all this defensiveness and kind of excuses. And I said, what would life feel like if from a core spot in your heart that you truly loved and appreciated who you were, and that you fly your freak flag, just be authentically you, like I am. One of the reasons why so many people connect with me, they may not necessarily get me, but they connect with me because I'm congruent to myself. This is who I am in all my glory. I don't wear the bandana for any virtue other than the fact I don't like to sweat. And so when I was a professional speaker, I was sweating on stage and I was doing this thing and I was like constantly thinking. So I thought, if I'm going to suck at this, I'm going to suck at it being me, because we have to ultimately be who we are at our true core. That's where we're supposed to be. Everybody's unique. And if we're trying to pretend to be somebody that we're not in order to get that validation, we're going to live an empty life. And so when I started embracing who I was, the kick-ass, no excuses coach, and started, dressing like this, people were like, what are you doing? But a lot of people were intrigued because I was just being me. I wasn't having to pretend to be anything that I wasn't. I was just congruent to myself, and talking the way I talk. And because I was being 100% congruent to myself, that connection that I developed with people, for them to be themselves unapologetically, became like an addiction. People were just like, oh my God, I got to get around this guy. He seems to understand. I was like, I haven't done anything super special. I just stopped giving myself excuses and started loving myself. And I think that's one of the most important things, is when you have a big enough why in your life, like if you understand what it is that you're meant to do, and you wake up every single day and you set that intention and you have gratitude for what it is that you're doing, and you eliminate the toxic people out of your life and you start giving yourself opportunities instead of excuses, it's pretty incredible what starts to unfold. And pretty soon, within a couple of years, you can truly change the trajectory of your life. And people say, oh my God, years. I'm like, yeah, you're going to go through that time anyway. You might as well go through it as a growth spurt and then be able to, on the other side of that, live congruently, authentically to your life's mission and purpose. I could talk about it for days.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And brilliantly said. So, Christopher, as I am hearing you share your perspective and your journey, what's coming up for me are multifold. One, people need to be comfortable with who they are, because that's all they are. We are each different, we are each unique, and we were uniquely created for a purpose. So I look at it as, I couldn't have a beautiful garden if I had just one flower, right? It takes flowers and plants of all kinds, leaves of all shapes and sizes and colors, and flowers that bloom in different seasons.
Yeah.
And so to me, I look at it as, I always ask my clients, are you comparing yourself to somebody? You will bloom in your season. You might be a winter bloomer, you might be an autumn bloomer. And that's a beautiful thing, because otherwise my garden would be gloomy and barren come autumn and winter. And there is nothing more beautiful and vibrant in the winter as an arborvitae. It doesn't have flowers. But arborvitae literally means the tree of life, and you could be that. Each of our purposes are different. How are we embracing it? And the fact that you're giving them permission to be themselves by being yourself, that is the single most important gift, right? The way we show up, we are giving people permission to do the same for themselves.
Yes.
What are some of the resistance that you have seen that people have for being themselves? Is it the fear of not being accepted, the fear of not being loved? Talk to us a little bit, because that will help folks start thinking about, oh, am I feeling that way? Am I putting myself through that? Because it kind of helps them hit the brakes.
No, that's great. You're asking beautiful questions. Thank you, Dr. Cass. Yes. I mean, a lot of it goes back to those abandonment issues that we feel as kids. You know, if we didn't get the love and affection from our mother or our father, chances are we're going to be looking for that through other people in our lives that remind us of those people. So they often say, the cliche is that, you know, you often marry, like for men, you marry the women in your life that are somewhat like your mother. Men marry, women marry men in their life that are somewhat like their father, because somehow they're still trying to get that validation, that acceptance, that approval from somebody in their life that represents them. So then they go out there and they start looking for those types of relationships. I invite people to sit there and say, okay, what would life feel like if you no longer cared what other people thought of you? You know, and you just let that go and just say, okay, I don't need anybody's validation, their significance, their approval, because there's 8 billion people out on the planet. And I can guarantee you guys, no matter what you're into, whatever your thing is, there are other people out in the world that are just like you that will appreciate who you are. Not a lot of people, I mean, people get this, but some people don't get it. They're like, what's this rock star guy? And what does he think he's doing? That's okay. I just wish those people well. Those are not my crowd. But the people who sit there and go, wow, he's just actually being himself. You know, I call my community the misfits for life. We're the people that have to get out there and band together and sit there and say, you know what? It's not only okay for us to be unique and sparkle our shine, but it's mandatory, because we're the ones that bring those colors to the other people's lives. And we're robbing other people of that experience if we're not truly embracing who we are. You know, Dr. Bonnie Ware, or Bonnie Ware is not a doctor, but Bonnie Ware wrote a book called The 5 Regrets of the Dying. And it's a fantastic, life-changing book. You read this book and it's from a hospice nurse who's sitting with person after person after person who's dying. And she decides, like, wow, there's a similarity here in what's happening. And she said the number one regret of the people that were dying is that they lived the life they thought they were supposed to live. They didn't live the life they wanted to live. And thinking about on your life, you know, would you be happy with all the things and all the people that you pleased and you had got their approval, only to find out that they're dead anyway? And now you're sitting there looking back in your life, realizing all the things that you didn't take. And you said something beautiful, Dr. Cass. You talked about comparison. So many people are like, oh, those people are doing this. Those people are doing this. Those people are doing this. I'm not doing that. And we see a snapshot of their life on Instagram or Facebook and we go, oh, they're so happy. But you didn't realize that maybe right before they were having a shitty moment and they're like, okay, let's just take a picture. geez. And then they go back to having a terrible moment. And you're like, oh, I want to be like them. There's a great video out there. It's by Steve Harvey, the comedian talk show host. It's Steve Harvey. It's called Jump. And if anybody wants it, they can send me a message and I'll send it to them. It's 1 minute and 30 seconds. And in that video, Dr. Cass, our friend, Dr. Sally Anderson, Miss Sally Anderson, God, I've got doctor in my head now. You're the doctor. Sally Anderson had me watch that video. It's 1 minute and 30 seconds. And in there, he talks about, we're like, oh, those people are doing this. Those people are doing that. He's like, they jumped. But guess what? When they jumped, their parachute didn't open right away. They got their back scraped up. They got their arms scraped up. They were sitting there free falling and scared half out of their mind that what they did was not the right decision. But ultimately their parachute opened. And he goes, but here's the situation. He goes, if you don't jump, your parachute will never open. And so what kind of regret would you have in your life? And so ultimately you have to sit there and decide, who are the 5 people that I'm around the most? Dr. Stephen Covey in the book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People said, look at the 5 people you're around the most. Write out those names on a list of paper, and sit there and write next to them. Are they constructive or destructive? Do they want you to go for your dreams? Do they challenge you to get outside your comfort zone? Do they want you to go out there and fail your way to success? Or do they want you to stay safe and comfortable like them? And, oh, you should do this. You should go to school and get a job and get a mortgage and have a family and do all those right things so one day you can retire. That's ridiculous. You should go out there and be living your life every single day, because there's no guarantee for tomorrow. And it's exciting and it's scary and everything else. But the thing I teach, Dr. Cass, is that there's 2 different types of people in this world right now. There's the people that are existing in the world, and they're playing the someday game. Someday when this is that and everything else is perfect, then I will do this. And there's people out there actually living life, and they're taking, crazy actions and everything else. And they go out there and they're learning and they're failing as they go, because it's not failing. You shouldn't be afraid of making mistakes. You should be afraid of living a life of quiet desperation, hoping, wishing, praying that somebody's going to come save you, when that's not the case. You have to take responsibility for your life and go out there and truly live it in your true purpose and your true sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Christopher. And I like to say people's full name, because to me, it's important to recognize the whole person. And so I love referring to you as Christopher. So I hope that's okay with you, Christopher.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And I love where you're going with this, right? And I want to thread what you said earlier to what you're talking about right now. What happens in the first 5 years of our life pretty much sets us up. But do people, the adults who bring us into this world, adults who care for us in that 5 years, are they aware of it? And in the West, we don't send the children to school until after 5, right?
Yeah,
am I correct?
5. Yeah, 4 or 5.
I come from a part of the world where, this is a funny story, I want to weave that into the conversation. I am the second child, was the oldest daughter. And in my Hindu, Sri Lankan culture, the daughter is raised to be the head of the household. And plus I grew up in the middle of a war. So there was a second reason, if anything happens to the mom, I have to be the head of the household. So when I'm 2 years old, everybody's telling me I have to be responsible. I have to be the matriarch. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, then I have to go learn. My brother is 1.5 years older than me, and they sent him, we start Montessori school at 3.5. And we had a rickshaw man. We didn't have a car, but we had a garage in our house. So we allowed the rickshaw man to park and live in the garage, and the rickshaw man in return took us to school. A rickshaw is one of those things where it has 2 wheels. It has a nice seat and a hood at the top, and the guy takes the handle and then he runs or he walks, right? It's not motorized, it's very manual, pretty cool for a kid. So the rickshaw man, Thaver, he is the one who lived in the garage. So it was like a big space for him. And he was my buddy. And he's the one I talked to. He's the one I shared all my dreams and my aspirations and all my 2-year-old ideas with. And the man patiently sat and talked to me, right? So he taught me that the first act of love is to listen. He was not blood. He was somebody who used that space, and he was in our lives. And so I had Thaver take me to school to see when my brother goes to school. Because I'm thinking in my 2-year-old brain, 2.5-year-old brain, I got to go to school. I got to go to school and I have to learn, because I got to become the mother. So at 2.5, one day, my parents both worked. So I come from a culture where both parents work. Mom had gone to the university. She was a professor. Dad had gone to the bank. He was a banker. So I got dressed and I went to school. I didn't think anything of it. And I knew how to go. So I walked And when I got out of school, Thurber comes looking for me. He says, why did you run away from home? I said, I didn't run away from home. I went to school. He says, oh, the whole town is looking for you. Your mom is crying. You get ready. They thought somebody kidnapped me or I ran away, right?
Oh, no.
Pandemonium in the house because I never asked for permission, apparently. Didn't occur to me that I had to ask permission. I was 2.5. So now I'm getting, first they were happy I'm there. Then I got reprimanded. I got questioned, cross-examined. I'm like, but you told me to become responsible. You told me I have to do all these things. So I believed I needed to get a head start. So I'm getting a head start. To this day, I don't know why they let me inside the school. The school didn't have a problem. They just let me in, right? So I've been in school since I was 2.5. The Montessori system is that teaching through experience. So we learned to write in a sandbox. First, they gave all the alphabets on sandpaper on a cardboard, and you take your fingers and you trace. So you learn your alphabets through touch and sensory feeling, and we have 249 letters in our language. So it was not English. Okay, and then you graduate from the sandpaper cardboard to actually sit in the sandbox while playing, write messages for each other. We were introduced to math by cooking. Take this cookie recipe and double it, triple it. So we're not culturally afraid of math. We embrace the sciences. We're taught experientially. Experience the reality of why you need this, because then learning becomes fun. So taking that fast forward and bringing it here, yes, that experience of introducing us to education and experiential learning very young sets us apart as a culture. Look at who's running all these tech firms. They're all South Asians, right? Mm-hmm. So something about the way we create those experiences for children make them excel. Yes. What if we take the good from there and bring it here, and then good from here to take it there, so that we are cross-pollinating the goodness instead of all the bad stuff, right? So as I'm thinking through what you're talking about for parenting purposes, give those experiential learning and immerse the children instead of overprotecting them. Let them go, let them experience. Then as adults, they are not going to overprotect their own children, because we're living in a generation where parents are overprotected. The younger millennials and the Gen Zs, parents, 30% of parents call the employer to say, you're stressing my child out. I think yeah. Even in school, parents are concerned about what homework you're doing. I know children whose parents are texting them and video calling them to see how their day is going while they're in class, while they're taking tests. Kids are getting thrown out of class. Helicopter parenting has become a problem. Oh, yeah. What advice do you have for parents in the name of protection? They're controlling and suffocating their children.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. I love that, Dr. Cass. I mean, it's so important. It's the fact that when we think about our own particular lives, again, going back to that situation, would we have learned what we learned in those trying situations if somebody had protected us from not having that? No, we have to do that. That was one of my things that, I used to be a compulsive motivationalist. Somebody in my circle of influence couldn't have a bad day without me getting down their case and going, no, you can have this and you can have this. And you have to just switch your perspective. Ultimately, as parents, we have to sit there and understand that when our kids go through these trying experiences, that's when they learn and they grow the most. Like you said, having those experiences engage all the different senses, and that wires that to be a new belief. The fact that they went and did something challenging and difficult and that they came out of it the other side. And the most important thing for parents to be able to do is to encourage that, and not want to sit there and do it for them, but to sit there and say, hey, listen, I'll be there on the other side if you have any questions or need any support, but this is something that you need to do on your own. You need to go to school today and give that book report at the front of the class. You need to go do this hard thing. Like I know my mom, when I was about 10 or 11 years old, back again, I'm a Gen Xer. You could send your kid out in the neighborhood to go mow lawns and wash cars. So at 10, 11 years old, as uncomfortable as it was, I had to help out the family because my mom was, spending all of her money. And so I took a car washing bucket and some soap and a couple of sponges, and I started going and knocking on doors. And it was uncomfortable for me, but my mom had me go do that because I needed that experience of talking to other people and to sell my services, if you will. I wouldn't be the man I am today. I mean, I went through a lot of terrible things with my mother, but I sit there and attribute that that was life happening for me and not to me, and that it was all a part of, the education of life. And that because I got to experience those things, and more importantly, it was up to me to decide to what meaning and what perspective I was going to give myself in those situations. And although it was hard and uncomfortable and everything else, I started recognizing that as I went through those things, was I learning a little bit more about myself? Yes. So every time that I did that, that compound interest gave me more confidence to be able to sit there and say, okay, what is my perceived fear of the situation? So for parents, we need to tell our kids that there's two ways you can look at life: through the lens of love or through the lens of fear. And studies show 98% of all fears never materialize except for within our brains. So we need to invite our kids to say, listen, rather than looking at what could potentially go wrong, how about we focus on what potentially could go right? And even if something does go wrong, you're going to learn something about that situation. So the next time you're faced with it, you won't make that same mistake twice, because now you've learned from it. So I tell people to go fail their way to success. And they sit there and they look at me like, what do you mean, Chris? I'm like, yeah, you were told not to fail. You were made to feel bad when you failed. If you got a bad report card, you were bad. If you did bad here, you were bad. So all of our lives were focused like, oh, as long as I do good, then as long as I impress people, then I'll be okay. But we wind up finding that that's a self-fulfilling prophecy later on in life, because then people in our life actually get real with us and we're like, oh, wait a minute, I haven't been held accountable for my decisions now. And then as adults, we have to learn to rewire our belief systems about taking those risks. So for parents, it's about sitting there making our kids get into that uncomfortable situation, because that's what's going to nurture them and grow them to be able to become stronger as adults.
Very, very much so. And I love how you talked about just because you make a mistake, you're not a mistake. And
Yes.
that is a distinction most people forget. I always go back to Edison. He figured out 10,000 ways how not to make a battery light bulb.
Exactly.
If he hadn't made a light bulb, we wouldn't be here today talking through a computer with lights behind it, bringing our entire holographic persona to life, right?
Yes.
So how many other things would not have happened if he hadn't gone through the process? And I extensively studied his life as a child because I was fascinated. And I learned that as a young child, he was curious about how chicken hatch eggs. So he started sitting on eggs to see if he could hatch eggs, right? And he ended up breaking the eggs. But this funny image, this little boy trying to hatch eggs like the chicken hatches its eggs. If he hadn't experimented as a child, he would never have gone on as an adult to make that light bulb. So allow your children to experiment. And a thing that they tried that didn't work doesn't make them bad, doesn't make them evil, doesn't make them a cast out. And disciplining the behavior is different from branding the child.
Yes.
And if we are mindful of that, then we become adults who can accept the fact that, you know what, in reality, life is not black or white, right or wrong, good or bad. You make the optimal decision with the most imperfect information we have at this moment.
Mm-hmm.
And with every decision come consequences, and have a risk mitigation plan for all possibilities of consequences. That's what life is.
Mm-hmm.
And the minute we start approaching it that way, then the fear goes away. So I love how you threaded the notion of fear as something that holds people back. So one special nugget I want you to share with everybody. What is the one thing everybody can do today, right now, to give themselves the opportunity to get unstuck? Because nothing happens until they get unstuck.
I love it, Dr. Cass. Thank you. The thing for me, honestly, that worked the best was back in 2008. I was successful by all stretches of metrics. I was making great money, had a great job, great life, girlfriend, and everything else. So everything was great. But what I was doing was I was waiting for life to unfold as I was going through life. I didn't have a clear picture of what my end goal was. I just knew I was like trying to maintain what it is that I had collected in my life, as far as job titles and vanity and material things and wealth and things of that nature. But there wasn't a deeper meaning and purpose to it. So back in 2008, I went to a funeral for one of my coworkers, to pay my respects. And I was sitting there in the back of the church. And the thing that surprised me, Dr. Cass, is I was watching my coworkers going up there and eulogizing this person. I had no idea that she did all the things that she did outside of work. So I only had a small perception of what she was, and found out that there was somebody who was putting little toy trinkets on our desks every morning. And I thought it was the HR department. Human resources are the ones that try to, help more employee morale. She was going to like some outlet store and buying these cool little toys, probably all of like 10 cents each. And she would occasionally come and put them on our desk. And so I found out from all these people, all the beautiful things that she did and how she was being remembered, not just for a sales rep, but for all these things that she did. And I thought to myself, Dr. Cass, I'm like, okay. And so I'm always trying to put myself in situations that I haven't been in to visualize how it would be if I reacted to that or what I would respond with. And I thought, okay, if I died tomorrow, who would show up and what would they say? And again, by all stretches of the world, I was successful in everything. I'd come out of being homeless and all those different things, had my master's degree. And I thought 10 or 15 people would show up. They would bring Miller Genuine Draft and Jack Daniels. They would bring Motley Crue and Bon Jovi records. And they would talk about all the stupid stuff Chris did. Remember that time he got drunk and did this? Remember that time he passed out and did this? Remember he chased that girl and did this? Remember that time he crashed on a surfboard? Remember, and all the crazy things that I did. And then, oh yeah, the postscript on that would be, oh yeah, he was a homeless 7th grade dropout who lived in the backseat of a station wagon with 18 cats and 2 dogs with a mother with very psychological disorders and changed the world. I was like, do I really want to have that little postscript? I want to be known as a party animal and the crazy guy. And so I went home and I was driving home, honestly, Dr. Cass, and I was still bugging me. I'm like, how can I take this situation and proactively put it into my mind, and so that I don't have regrets that if I died tomorrow, that only 10 or 15 people are going to show up and do this. And I thought, okay, well, if the eulogy was what was connecting me to that experience, then I need to write my own eulogy. And we know that one of the biggest fears in life is speaking in front of people, which for me doing this, I had zero confidence when I was a kid. So for me to go out in front of thousands of people and speak on stage, I have done that work. And so I went home and I started writing my eulogy. Pen to paper, started writing it out, had no idea what to experience or what to expect. I wrote it out on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. And I finished it and I got to the bottom. I figured I'm only going to write one page. I went to my kitchen, got a glass of water, came back to my office, and literally, Dr. Cass, I was going to push it away because I was like, okay, I did that exercise. I'll deal with it later. I'm going to go do this more important stuff. And I thought, Chris, just take a moment, just read what you wrote, because I just did it all free writing. And so I picked up the piece of paper and I started reading it. And I thought, okay, well, if it's a eulogy and people are usually reading eulogies out loud, I'm going to read this out loud. So alone in my house, nobody was home. I started Christopher Rausch, And then I get to the middle part, Dr. Cass, and was like, Christopher Rausch will have fought for what's right and what's fair. He will have risked for which that mattered, and he will left the earth a better place for who he was and what he did. Boom. I had tears running down my cheeks. Never before I had really considered what my real impact in the world was going to be for my time here on earth. What would I really accomplish? And by reading that, I had tears running down my face. I'm like, wow, I could go from being that kid with no confidence, feeling no sense of self-love or worth or anything else, to going and making the world a better place, to using my experiences and my education and everything else to uplift people and have this world become a better place for our kids and our kids' kids. Tears running down my face. From that point forward, that was my new mission. So every day, as long as I wake up and say, okay, my mission in this world is to fight for what's right and what's fair and to risk for what's that mattered and leave the earth a better place. As long as I'm doing that, whenever my time goes, I won't have any regrets. I won't think, wow, I'm leaving a horrible legacy for my son to pick up and inherit. If this is the last thing we ever do, God forbid, and my son goes to watch it, was dad living his purpose? 100%. And so when I wake up every day before my eyes open, I say what I'm grateful for, because I believe that gratitude is one of the biggest things that we can harness. If you can't be happy with what you have, even if you don't think you have a lot, you will continue not to have a lot. So for me, it's gratitude. And then I set the intention for the day. And one of those intentions, Dr. Cass, is to fulfill that legacy. So something today I'm going to do, I'm going to fight for what's right and what's fair. I'm going to risk for what's that mattered, or I'm going to make the earth a better place for who I am and what I do. So if I find myself going down a negative rabbit hole during the day, I say, did I set the intention to go down this negative rabbit hole? No. Okay. What intention did I set today that I have not yet fulfilled? Okay. I'm going to do a video. I'm going to do a post. I'm going to do my show. I'm going to do something that if today's my last day, I've left the mark that I need to leave and that I want to leave. So it gives my life that bigger vision, that bigger purpose, to know that irregardless of whatever is going on in the world, the politics and everything, the pandemic, I can't control any of that. All I can do is control my reaction to it. But what I can do is use my light and use my spirit to uplift those people that are potentially suffering and sitting in quiet desperation, to write their eulogy and to have that bigger picture. My picture is not to be here to be a victim. My picture is not to be here waiting for somebody to save me. My picture is that I'm going to pull myself with my bootstraps and go out and live the life that I deserve to live, irregardless of what people said to me in my past.
Absolutely. And that is such good lived experience-based advice. So folks, as you're listening to this, remember, set your intentions for the day, understand your purpose, and intentionally show up every day to live your purpose. And just like the GPS is calibrating in your car as you're driving, am I going towards my destination? Is there a better, safer way to get there? That's all we're asking. We're asking ourselves, do I need to course correct? Do I need to recalibrate? Because my purpose still remains the same. My intentions and my intentionality of living this life still remains the same. Beautifully said. Wonderfully said, Christopher. What is the best way for folks to reach you, stay in touch with you, communicate with you, seek your assistance, whatever they wanted to connect with you on? What is the best way?
The best way, the easiest way is noexcusescoach.com. Noexcusescoach.com. Right there on the front page is my Facebook, my LinkedIn, my YouTube. It's got links to all my shows. I do a podcast on Tuesdays, which you were just recently on, called The Raw and Unscripted Show. I do that Tuesdays at 7 p.m. live. It's a video cast and a podcast. And then I do the Unfiltered Experience on Fridays, which is at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And both of those you can find through my website. And would love to connect with anybody who's watched this and what I would like to offer a conversation with them to see what I can do to help them uplift their life. Just as my way of saying thank you for watching this broadcast.
Beautiful, beautifully said. And when you reach out to Chris, if you're sending a social media message, make sure you type in the subject line Goldilocks, and Christopher will know you're coming through this program, if you remember to do that. And Christopher and I are part of this community that works together, helps each other, lifts each other up, and we're each other's blind spot watchers, and we're each other's wind beneath the wing. And in that community, everybody was like, okay, we want to see Christopher's Goldilocks, how he's going to unleash his Goldilocks, right? So this is a running joke in the group. But so as you listen to this program and as you are thinking about what you have gained today, share with us how this is helping you rewire your thinking, how this is helping you get unstuck. And with that self-evaluation, I'm going to open this up for conversation. Elisa, thank you for joining the conversation. What questions are coming up for you as you hear our conversation so far?
Well, now I'm enjoying it, and lots of great advice in there. I'm going to try that eulogy exercise. I think that's a great way to establish like long-term goals and make sure you're on the right course. One of you had said at one point, but I guess my question would be, because you guys touch a little bit on parenting, and I do think it's important for them to, explore and find their own path as well. But, and I wouldn't define myself as a helicopter mother, but I feel like there's a lot more dangers that are present today, and there's always been danger, but like just the things that come into your house via technology, and even just the way things can be so instant for them. So I don't know. I guess that my struggle is my question would be, how do you give them freedom while also protecting them? But I know that's not the exact focus of this talk, but it just came to my mind while you guys were touched on that a little bit.
Well, I think that's a great question, Elisa. The fact of what we can do is we can set boundaries. We can set expectations for our kids to be able to say, okay, listen, this is the potential situation that you may encounter. When you encounter that situation, here's a couple of ways you can do it. So kind of laying out that path for them, and then having that open, honest communication. I know my son's 6 years old and we adopted him from birth, so there's not the biological factor. But one of the things I've always made sure is having open and honest communication with him and asking him, okay, paraphrase back to me, son, what you think what you heard me say. Because so oftentimes we tell our kids something like, do you understand? And they go, and they have no idea what it is that they were told. And then they have to try to figure it out, hope, wishing, and praying that they get it right. And so I'll sit there and say, okay, buddy, here's the ramifications if you do this, kind of like you spell it out. So if you make that decision to have this outcome, then here's the ramifications for that. However, if you change and you decide to do it this way, here are the bonuses and the benefits that's going to happen with that. So do you understand that? Can you make that decision for yourself? Yes. Okay. So for example, if it's cleaning up his room or something like that, okay, you have to clean up your room, you need to put your clothes away, you need to go downstairs and put the stuff outside away. Otherwise, you're not going to get your screen time. Do you understand that? Yes. Okay. You have plenty of time, just within the next couple hours. I need you to do that. Otherwise, we're going to have to take the iPad away and you're going to have to go do those things all immediately. Do you understand? Yes. Okay. Yes, Dad, I'm going to do these things. And so kind of building in those parameters and those boundaries to sit there and set that expectation so that when later on, 2 hours later, he hasn't done anything, it's like, okay, buddy, we made this agreement. Okay, Dad, I know I screwed up. I didn't manage my time well. But I don't hardly get any grief from him anymore because I sat there and I get on his level and I make sure he understands. Do you understand why we're doing that? We got friends and family coming over today and we want to set a good example. So we want to have ourself nice and clean. And that way also when you're at school, you've already got those habits. So it doesn't impact your school friends. And later in life, it's going to impact your spouses and things of that nature. So I'm giving them that big picture and I'm also setting the example by my own actions, because sometimes as parents, we sit there and say, it's like, do as I say, not as I do. That's one thing I heard as a kid, the incongruency of what my mom was telling me what to do and what she was doing always caused me to really question, okay, why do I have to do it if you don't have to do it? And so that congruency factor of us, being in alignment with our own selves and saying, okay, listen, what are my situations I need to do today? What are the outcomes if I don't do them? And then holding ourselves to that same standard so that they see that we're being congruent with our words and our actions, I think is one of the best ways we can do it.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant question, Elisa. And I love where you took the answer, Christopher, specifically overlaying how you're raising your son, right? So that is truly your continuously living experience.
Mm-hmm.
I want to add to that, Elisa, from a slightly different perspective. In the developed world, in the Western culture, where there's so much safety and security, we worry about little things.
Mm-hmm.
But then our children are going to go into the world and live and compete and coexist with folks who haven't had any of those. I am one of those children who grew up in the world where it was a bloody war. At 16, I had to take my siblings and leave home, right? My parents let me take all their children and leave the country, go to a place where we didn't speak the language. We had to learn another language. They weren't able to send us money, and they weren't sure if they will ever see us or talk to us again. And we didn't know if we would see them ever again. Imagine, I always think about what it took for them to let us go. And it's not just me. Look at the Vietnamese boat people. Look at people who are coming in as refugees through our borders. How much are they sacrificing, and they're leaving parts of their families behind, and they're taking risks of unimaginable magnitude for one reason and one reason only. Letting somebody go might give them a chance to live, and we've given them enough love and tools that they are going to be okay having that faith, right? Children thrive when the parents have faith in them. When parents have faith, children always turn around and say, is mom and dad going to be happy about this? Is this going to make them proud that they let me go? And so there is another way of looking at this situation. I don't have children of my own, but I am the second parent to all my friends' children, all my teammates' children, because maybe I come from that different perspective that I am not overprotective. And maybe because I never gave birth to them, maybe I have the luxury of giving them more rope and giving them more room. I'm not going to analyze that because I can't, I don't have the frame of reference to do that. But ultimately, can somebody be there? If not you, can another adult be in the life of the children to provide that support? Because then holistically, we're giving the children the ability to test their wings. Birds do this beautifully. I have a Christmas tree, a pine tree in my garden in Chicago, and robins nest every year. And I watch the birds. they build a nest, they lay the eggs, they hatch the eggs, they feed the babies worms. And then the mother and father know which one is ready to leave the nest. First, they actually kick the baby out. And then they spend the time teaching the baby how to go get the worms. And then the second one is kicked, the third one is kicked. One time there were 4 eggs, and the fourth one, we called him Bobo. He was a little slow. He or she didn't know how to eat. And the whole family stayed around and helped, tried to help. And then 2 weeks later, they all left and Bobo was there. So my husband and I, Mike and I, were trying to get worms and feed him. We called the animal shelter and asked if they could come and help. And they all laughed at us and said, you know, X% of all these robins die. You need to let nature take its course. So knowing to let go is equally important, because sometimes when you let go, the baby learns. I just wanted to throw it out there because there is nature given perspective in addition to, you know, our need to protect when we are parents.
Well, and that's very, yeah, that was a great example. And I think some of it's society based too, with all the pressure on parents to be perfect in a lot of ways. And I mean, this kind of goes to your story that you can be successful in spite of, you know, what happened in your childhood and what your parents may or may not have done. But I think as a society, we put a lot of pressure to, you know, set our kids up, but for success. And it's great if you can, but also, you know, just fostering the skills to be able to, because they're their own people. And at some point, they're going to make their own decisions. And yeah, so you can just do the best you can, like the mama birds, to try to teach them how, but you know, let them fly. Right. That was
yeah, absolutely. So this has been a wonderful conversation, Christopher. Thank you for your words of wisdom. Thank you for sharing with us how we can get a hold of you. Elisa, love the questions, love the audience engagement. And as we bring this very important conversation to a close, I want all of us to take a moment today and every day to think about what are my intentions for the day, as Christopher mentioned. And then truly take a deep dive and find your purpose. What is your purpose? Why were you put on this earth? Uniquely, beautifully created to be you. There is only one you. How do you show up as you? And because you have been here, how are you going to make this world a better place? If you can find the answer to that question, invest the time, and then use that to intentionally set the course and course correct as you go, you are going to find that you never allow yourself to get stuck. So take that moment, take that journey inwards and find your purpose. Then go out into the world and live your purpose, because I can promise you your happiness comes from that, not because you accomplished something, but because you are living your purpose and you are authentically being the person you were created to be. So go out there and be who you were meant to be. And in the process, keep transforming lives. And every day, take a moment to transform yourself.